Hi, and welcome to DPW 2024 podcast. I'm Jonathan O'Brien. Welcome also to the Procurement Show podcast, because this will also be part of that podcast as well. So today, my guest describes herself as a super energetic, fast-talking person and a transformative CPO. She works in a highly regulated business and knows a thing or two about how to make strategic procurement really, really work. She's also the CEO and founder of a procurement advisory called Eucalyptus, get that, and she's passionate about getting the organization to understand, embrace, and value procurement. Please welcome the CPO of Virgin Money, Michelle Baker. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm delighted to be here.
It's great to have you here, and we're going to talk about, is procurement undervalued, and can tech help? So the first question, does procurement need to be better valued?
Absolutely, absolutely. Jonathan, as I was saying a little earlier when we were chatting, I've been in procurement for quite a long time now, and I've kind of grown up with procurement. And the thing that's always struck me is how much of a positive and profound impact a good procurement function can have on corporate outcomes, on business outcomes. And yet so often we come with a begging bowl to ask for some crumbs, a seat at the table, some funding, in a way that our sales colleagues just do not. And one of the things that strikes me about the sort of economics of it all is every dollar we save or avoid spending is a dollar in the bank, whereas a salesperson always has a margin to have to deal with. So if you've got a 30% margin, only 70% of that amount of money is being banked. And that for me seems a tremendous waste and a tremendous shame. So I profoundly believe procurement is undervalued, and I feel it's my mission to change that.
Well, it's a really good mission to have. And it's interesting that you kind of talk straight about the cost dimension and the pressure we're under to just get the numbers in.
Yeah.
So it seems that we've got to have a strategic approach to doing this. So what do you think is the most important strategic thing a procurement function needs to do?
I mean, I think there's two aspects to it. I think, first of all, as a leader in the procurement function, you have to have a vision of what your procurement function can do for your business. And that will differ according to the industry. And then you need to speak your business's language. It's really, really important that you're not speaking procurement gobbledygook. As soon as you speak savings, your finance colleagues start to say, well, where do I see that in the budget? And that's a very, very difficult answer to formulate. So I think you've really got to learn to understand the value of your procurement function and then speak the language of your business and understand how you can make that impact. That will then give you the permission to go and have the right sorts of conversations with the business. But of course, if your procurement function isn't doing the basic things of saving money and managing the supply base effectively, you're probably not going to get the opportunity to have those conversations. Yeah,
and there can easily be such a disconnect with how the organization does that. I remember working with one organization where the CPO stood up in a town hall meeting and said, hey, we've saved 1 million euros. And the CFO then stood up and said, well, that's lovely. Where is it? I can't see it on the bottom line. And if you have that sort of disconnect, then it's not going to work. So clearly the business expects savings, but is there anything else that you think the business expects procurement to be doing?
I do think there's an expectation that we manage the supply base, and I think that expectation has become greater and greater over time. So managing the supply base previously was probably just a case of getting a great deal. Now we have post-signature contract lifecycle management, we have supplier relationship management, and increasingly matters like DEI, ESG, third-party risk management, particularly in regulated financial services organizations, to have to consider. And invariably, you're finding a home for those considerations in a procurement function. And the allegations that the supply base isn't being managed effectively usually sits with the CPO as the party most to blame for that. So I think that's kind of been a changing dynamic beyond just savings that I've seen in my sort of 2.5 decades in procurement.
Yeah, and it's so easy that there can be a sort of conflict there. It takes one small thing, in my experience, one small thing for somebody in the business to say, well, procurement aren't doing this, and actually that small thing may be a product of many, many things, and it's just part of how we do business. So there's a bit around how we get that conversation going, I think, and what can we do? How do we get that dialogue going with the business, but also with the senior team as well? What do you need to do to get that moving?
You have to build a relationship. I mean, any consultancy organization will tell you if you're not building the relationship with your client base, you're probably not going to be getting the relationship sales that could accrue. So I think it's really important as a procurement practitioner to get out of the back office. You can't be sitting counting your shekels
Yeah.
and hoping that you're going to have a positive impact, which means that you have to spend time with your technologists, you have to spend time with your marketing team, you have to spend time with the HR and particularly the finance organizations, understanding how they see their problems and then what is the solution that you can offer to those problems. I think all too often, again, we think that savings are the most important thing and that obscures the ability to have a decent conversation.
Yeah.
What I do, and you can probably tell I'm somebody who enjoys a conversation, is I spend a lot of time investing in the relationships that I have with colleagues to try and understand what contribution they are trying to make to a positive business outcome, and then how the supply base and our management collectively of the supply base can help seek that outcome.
Yeah. And I think, just to echo what you say, my experience, that relationship bit is the single most important thing that a procurement function has to do. Get that bit right, everything else happens. Fail to do that, and you're back to what we said now, the conflict. And there's another dynamic that I'm seeing, which is kind of this expectation that tech will solve everything, and suddenly you don't need a relationship because actually human beings aren't quite in the picture anymore. Now, got to be careful what we say because we're at DPW 2024. This is the foremost tech exhibition for procurement and supply chain in the world.
Yep.
I guess the question is if we're in this tech storm, is that a distraction right now, or what should we be doing, and what do you think we should that the organization needs and expects of procurement in terms of tech?
So look, I think good old bog standard sourcing strategies are maligned. I think really understanding what you need to buy and whether you should be making it is basic brass tacks that you should be following. So it is the Wild West out there. I have been buying technology for a very, very long time, and we are in a bubble. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic bubble because I do truly believe that generative AI, large language models, and how we can utilize those as, to coin Microsoft's proprietary term, co-pilot, an accomplice, if you will, is going to be it's going to change the face of work. So in the same way as we went from typing pools to a world populated with PCs. So I think we're seeing a very, very big shift in the way in which human beings use technology. But there's also a lot of marketing material out there that says AI, AI, AI. And while some of that is probably partially true, it may be immature. It may not do what it says on the tin. And I think it's really important for a good procurement function to have the mechanism to say, well, why do we need to buy this? What is the sourcing decision here that enables the business outcome? And if so, how do I then sift the marketing material from what is reality? And that for a lot of procurement practitioners is going to be a learning curve.
Yeah.
So we are all going to have to learn once again how to use a new type of technology in the way that we have with WhatsApp, in the way that we have with getting a smartphone, in the way that we have with booking our holidays. We no longer go to a travel agent. So I do think that human beings have the learning agility to be able to make this change.
Yeah.
But if you make it an institutional change, it will be more difficult than if you can make it a personal change. So as a sourcing practitioner, I would urge you to get out there and really understand what's happening in the technology space in and around your industry sector, not just helping the procurement function, but in and around your industry sector, stuff is happening.
Yes.
That is AI informed.
Yeah.
What is it? Who stands to benefit most? And what impact can it have on your business? So that's just basic procurement 101. As a person, as a human being, I would say, get yourself up a learning curve. Once upon a time, no one could touch type, and now everybody can touch type because you need to. So I think we've all got to learn what this AI thing could mean for our world to come, because it is going to profoundly change it. And then I would say, as a leader of a function, get out there and have those conversations with your business. Your business is thinking exactly the same thing about, what is this AI thing? How can it help me in HR? How can it help me in finance? And there are a lot of people knocking on doors saying, how can we show you our new shiny thing? A good procurement organization will help discern the lead from the true golden orbs.
Yeah. There are two things that really fascinate me with what you've just said. I'm going to come back to those two letters in just a moment. But you talked about how in Virgin Money you're using Microsoft Copilot to kind of get behind things. Now, that's a really interesting shift, because if you walk around this exhibition, if you look at the tech that's out there, there's lots of brilliant little pieces of tech. And one of the risks, one of the things I've seen in recent years is islands of technology. Some of them are really good. Some of them are shiny things that promise a lot and really don't do it. And there's this kind of shakeout happening right now. But you've got these kind of little islands of tech which do something. And a lot of organizations have built a strategy based on buying those. And then you've got these kind of, I guess, foundation things like Microsoft Copilot. Microsoft Teams did that, as we came out of COVID or during COVID. All of a sudden, hey, there's this thing that pretty much takes care of a bunch of collaboration stuff. And that instantly put a bunch of small players that have been playing on the periphery of that out of business. So we kind of see these kind of sea changes in technology where the underpinning technology allows people to be more productive, more collaborative, and to get stuff done and share stuff. So, I mean, that approach is fascinating, and I think ahead of what many are doing, because I think many are still buying those islands of technology. But let's come back to, you mentioned the AI words. Every stall here will have an AI something. Some of it is really genuine,
yes,
and groundbreaking, and some of it is just, hey, we've got to say AI because if we don't, we're going to be left behind. But I'm going to be a bit provocative here. Is AI going to replace the procurement human?
I'd like to think not, but I think there are certain job classes that are more prone to replacement by humans, by technology than by humans. If you're a relationship-driven procurement practitioner, I don't think you've got any risks. If you're somebody who crunches numbers in the background, a large language model's ability to see the patterns and the insights from those patterns is probably going to be a whole lot more effective than the 7 bits of data we told our human brain can accommodate at any one time. So I do think in time we will see the disappearance of certain types of human performed work because artificial intelligence will just be better at it than we are. So for example, here's a use case. The old market scan. Yeah. So you do a market scan. We want to buy something along these lines. Do I have access to a third party that allows me to do the market scan? Probably not. Do I have the time to do it? Pop your query into Copilot or ChatGPT, and within less than a second, you've got 10 names of credible propositions within a very, very niche area potentially. And I've tested it. So if you think about that from a sourcing perspective, all of a sudden you've got 10 names, you can find out about mergers, acquisitions, divestitures in that entity, how long have they been going, what's their pedigree, who's their CEO, what's their financial performance, all within milliseconds.
Yeah.
So that puts a procurement organization on steroids, and this is the kind of thing that I find tremendously exciting. But we have to know how to use the tool.
Yeah.
So they talk a lot about human in the loop, and most of human in the loop is about verifying the veracity of the data that the black box of a large language model spits out. I mean, we all know that there are hallucinations. So I do think that there's a sort of a sensible force that humans can bring over the top of what gets spat out. But as a starter for 10 and getting you to 80% of a sourcing strategy, 80% of a category strategy, 80% of a vendor strategy, it is a remarkable little friend to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, and I think the other dimension with that, of course, is we're going to need a different type of human. We're going to need a human that can do that stuff, not the kind of crusty old kind of procurement person of the past.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I completely agree with that, and I this is probably a little bit provocative, but being my age, I've seen a lot of technological shifts. I'm somebody who, I saw a meme the other day that said Gen X is angry because we had to invest in all of our vinyl records, and then we had to replace them with CDs, and then we had to replace them with MP3, and now we have to pay a subscription to be able to get our music. No wonder Gen X is angry, which resonated with me. But all of those technological shifts I've lived through, and I kind of go, and I just accommodated those. I didn't at any point say, well, can I cope with this change? Can I learn how to use a smartphone? Can I learn how to use text messages or WhatsApp or a banking application? I didn't question any of that learning agility. I just did it. And the point is, we've all just done it. So I don't think it needs a different kind of human. I just think it needs a human that is curious and alive about the world in which we find ourselves, and what this new technology can offer us in the same way as we've gone through, technological shifts over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm a Gen Xer that's still got my vinyl collection, and I'm very, very proud of that as well. You talked briefly about numbers there. Let's talk about budgets, because in all the time I've worked in procurement's been about how can you help but the budget? How can you save money? And people are motivated based on savings and savings alone. Slightly changing in that ESG is now playing a part of that. But if we're going to have an effective procurement team, then does procurement then need to be part of how organizations set budgets and motivate people?
Yes, absolutely. It is again about talking the financial language. So budgets are set for a reason. We have targets, we have performance numbers, and I think it's really, really important that procurement understands how those budgets have been set, what challenges those budgets were put to, and then what gaps exist in the budget. I mean, financial organizations typically run hot, run cold, are risk averse or not risk averse, depending on the industry. And I think you've really got to understand how your finance colleagues have worked with the business to come up with a number or a purse in which a particular business unit has to operate. And then I think more strategically, how do we as a procurement function then look horizontally across the numbers, because each division has their own number, to try to think about the aggregation of spend opportunities so that we can get a number that is enterprise-wide rather than divisionally split. That's an art as well as a science, and I think you've got to have the zoom out perspective of what's the budget in the big, and the only way that you do that is to have a close relationship with your finance organization and the folks who are monitoring the budget, and then keep a close eye on that on a monthly basis. What's the gap in the budget? Dear Jim, what is your gap in your budget? How do you think you can close it? What can we do jointly to try and figure that out? Sometimes most times that's a joint initiative. Procurement has to do a little bit of stuff here. The business had to do a little bit of stuff there, particularly around demand management. But if you can get that triumvirate of your finance business partner, the colleague that you're supporting, and procurement into the same dialogue, speaking the same language, referring to the same numbers, that's a beautiful relationship to getting great outcomes.
Yeah. And back to human relationships again as well. Now, you describe yourself as a transformative CPO, which implies you've kind of got the ability to get people to follow you on that journey, because you can't do it alone. So how do you do that? How do you inspire your team to follow you? What do you do?
I talk, but I know others do as well. I talk about visionary leadership. And by that, I actually mean a very simple thing. It is impossible to lead if you cannot create a vision. And the vision is purely, where are we going? And so you have to fire up somebody's imagination to say, imagine if we could, and then fill in the blanks. And that is, maturity dependent. It is personality dependent. It depends on, how advanced your procurement function is, how able your company or your industry is to absorb a more strategic or a more thoughtful procurement capability. And that does differ. It really, I've done this across a number of industry verticals right now. The only thing that doesn't change across all of those verticals and all of those industries is the human beings that populate them. Yeah. And so you've got to get into the heart. Any marketeer will tell you this. You've got to find the passion for people to kind of go, I see myself, and the analogy I use is always like going on a holiday. So where are we going? Are we going to Cape Town, or are we going to Timbuktu? Let's pick and let's go there together. And then we'll decide how we're going to get there. And, we might decide to begin with we're going to go by bicycle, but that's not working out so well. So we might have to pivot to a train or something along those lines. And that really for me is how you've got to, as a leader, set a destination jointly with your team, create a belief that that's a good destination to go to, and then get people on the bus. So how do we all get there together? And aren't we excited about this? And so I'm looking for ways that I grow better capability in my team, because I'm a great believer in strengths rather than weaknesses. Yeah. So if I can make you be a superpower in your strengths, I'm going to get the best out of you and you're going to get the best out of yourself. So constantly looking from a talent development perspective, how I can create your next best opportunity for your superpowers, and what can I do as a leader to facilitate that journey. Branson has that famous quote attributed to him, which is, what happens if we train people and they leave? And his retort being, what happens if we don't and they stay? And I think that's kind of for me one of the responsibilities I feel very, very deeply as a leader is create the vision, create some dot points, create reasons to believe that that's a destination worth making the journey for, and then help people get on the bus so that they're equipped for the journey. And unfortunately, there's going to always be folks that don't want to get on the bus.
Yeah. And I had the honor of meeting Richard Branson very recently and actually seeing him in action, just seeing how he inspires his team. And he absolutely does that. Everybody just follows him because he says, that's what we're going to do. And they just get behind him. And I love the analogy of being on holiday because we so easily fall into the trap of saying, hey, we're going to one destination. But actually we're not. We're going to London, Stockholm, New York. Maybe next week it'll be Beijing. And perhaps actually it's all changed. We're going to Sydney.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what procurement's been like over the last 5-10 years. There's no kind of one thing. It pivots again. But if we're going to transform procurement, we've talked about how we do it internally. What about the supply base? Does transforming procurement mean that we've got to change the supply base in some way?
I think it goes again to the enterprise strategy. I really do think somewhere in your organization, your business has a strategy that's been written down. And unpicking and unpacking that revenue inflection, risk management, cost management dynamics that your CEO and his or her leadership team have is a helpful start to understanding what the supply base can do in service of that mission. And as I said earlier, going back to brass tacks of, do we need to make this or can we buy it? And being crisp with the leadership team on why are we buying all of the staff augmentation when actually it's going to be a steady state of FTEs. We should rather be hiring talent and building that talent so that we've got it in-house, as an example, in the resource planning. So I don't think fundamentally the supply base needs to change, but we do need to be cognizant that this emerging technology will have an impact on all of our suppliers, and ask Copilot or ChatGPT what the impact might be, because that can be extraordinarily illuminating. It's going to get simultaneously much more complex and also much more simple. We're seeing a lot of aggregation. There's going to be, as we've seen with previous technological shifts, consolidation. Bigger whales will swallow smaller minnows.
Yeah.
There will be an evolving culture. Large language models are not cheap to run. So those with deep pockets are more able to provide something that is ultimately useful. And so, Ben Thompson, the blogger from Stratechery, writes quite interestingly about ChatGPT becoming a platform, APIs into the platform. And I think we will probably also see ChatGPT over closed data sets, so intra-corporate. That's a bit of a change. So all of this data that's been digitized, could we finally harvest something from it? Could we mine it in prospects and get something out of it? I think possibly we might just find out that there's a lot of garbage in there and far more hallucinations than we'd like.
And I'm seeing that this kind of rise in the because for the LLMs to work, they've got to learn on good stuff, and actually all the good stuff is commercially confidential in the companies that have done good stuff. So it doesn't learn from that. So you end up with this kind of garbage in, garbage out thing. But I'm seeing a rise in companies having wall-gardened AI environments, whether it's within Microsoft or a Chat GPT environment or something else. So and we've done that as well. But it means that suddenly, if you've got a good data set, you don't let anyone else get advantage of that. You keep that advantage, but at the same time, you allow all the power that AI can bring if it's used well. And I guess, that brings me to, one of the final questions, which is sustainable procurement. What are you doing in Virgin Money around sustainable procurement? Is it a priority, and how are you doing it?
As a corporation operating in today's world, we can't not be sustainable.
Yeah.
Our footprint is primarily bank branches and head offices and data centers, so primarily carbon emissions. So we have declared targets to the market and are closely tracking to those targets, so that's encouraging. And increasingly putting the onus upon our supplier base to have science-based targets themselves. So working more with suppliers who are committed to ESG and environmental considerations is of great priority to that. And that's a standard part of our RFP process now, and a set of supplier conditions that we ask for in any supplier that we want to bring into our ecosystem.
It's been fascinating. We started talking about, is procurement undervalued? And I think you very clearly said, absolutely it is. And we've covered a lot of ground on that. If I asked you for the kind of, what are the three takeaways from what we've discussed today? What would they be?
I think relationships with the business is the most important skill that any procurement practitioner could and should be developing. I think we all have to learn the new tool set because it is going to profoundly change our lives. And I think we, in a very, very chaotic world, run the risk of overcomplicating things. We don't need more inundation with data and complexity. Dumb it down a little. Make it simple. Yeah. Go on a holiday. Think about make versus buy. If you can try to make things more of a binary, you'll help navigate the path through, do I go left or do I go right, much more effectively than if you go, oh my goodness, what do I do about AI, which is an insolvable problem.
Michelle Baker, CPO of Virgin Money and CEO and founder of Eucalyptus. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the DPW 2024 podcast and the Procurement Show podcast. It's been an honor to hear what you've had to say.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's been a delight to be here.